So what I'm going to go over in this tutorial is customizing your wall types. Up until now, we have created walls by just clicking on wall and then click on the pull down and using these generic walls that Revit provides. But what happens if we don't want any of these walls, right? So for example, there's wood siding on wood stud, wood shingle over wood siding, but there's no concrete finish. There's no stucco finish. There is a brick finish. But what if we want, there's no metal siding, right? So what happens if we want to customize our walls? So that's what we're going to be covering. Now, we can start off with a generic wall. And I should say, that this process really really comes down to how well do you know construction and how well do you know how a wall is constructed and all of the different elements that go into the construction of a wall, right? So in other words, concrete isn't just placed right on the studs. You need the plywood sheathing, you need the metal lath, you need all sorts of elements. And if you're not that well versed in in that type of construction, which I imagine most students are not, it's always better to just start off with something that Revit has already created and then just make the changes where you need to. Okay. But what I'm going to cover is how do we create, let's say you do know how a wall is constructed, right? How do we get started from nothing? Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get started with just one of these generic just generic walls. And I'm going to, let's start off with a generic 6-inch, okay? We're going to edit type, and then we're going to go up to edit structure. Okay? And this is what we have. We have the core boundaries, okay? And the structure right in the middle. Now the core boundaries, these we cannot adjust, we cannot change, we can't do anything to it. But these are in place to tell us how, or to tell Revit what is the face of core, right? To specify the difference between a finished material and the actual core. So that's why we end up having the core boundary, and whatever we put in between these two core boundaries is going to be our structure. Okay, so I'm going to start off by clicking right here where it says structure, and we have function. Okay, so this is under the function row. I'm going to click on this pull down, and we have five or six. We have structure, we have substrate, we have thermal air layer, we have finish 1, finish 2, and then membrane layer. Okay. Structure is the structure. So structure is what we'd place in between the core boundaries. Substrate would be any type of solid object like plywood, right? That is a substrate. It's not part of the finish. We're not going to ever see it, but it's part of the construction of the wall. Okay, so if we're doing stucco, for example, you would put plywood on the face on the exterior side of the studs. Okay, so a substrate is any solid material. Then we have the thermal air layer, and that just refers to a gap, an air gap. Sometimes we have air gaps for insulation purposes. Sometimes we want to show an air gap because we're furring out a wall. So we would place that under the air or thermal layer. And then we have finish 1 and we have finish 2. Finish 1 and finish 2 refer to our finishes. Okay. Now Revit doesn't actually specify the difference between your finish face exterior or finish face interior. We have to do that. So I typically will always use finish 1 as an exterior and finish 2 as an interior, but that's just my rule of thumb. You should generate your own rule of thumb. You could follow that same rule of thumb, but it's important to note because you know how when an exterior wall meets an interior wall in Revit, and it joins and it automatically connects our finish material. What Revit is really doing is it's saying, okay, I need to connect finish 2 with finish 2, or I need to connect the finish 1 from this material with the finish 1 of this material. Okay, and so that's why it's important to kind of have similarities or a consistency, because you're going to want your finish 1 of one wall type line up with the finish 1 of your other wall type. So for these tutorials, I'm using finish 1 for exterior, finish 2 for interiors. And then we have a membrane layer. And a membrane layer is also a kind of solid object, kind of like the substrate, but it's just a thin layer. So something like waterproofing, for example. When we waterproof our waterproofing on an exterior wall is, I mean, it's a fraction. It's a fraction of an inch. It's, 30 seconds of an inch, or, it's not even a 16th of an inch. It's like really, really heavy, thick construction paper. Okay, so that would be considered a membrane layer. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and click on structure because we're in our structure right here. Then we have our material. I'm going to click on these 3 dots right there. And this takes us into our materials. So it's asking what material is our structure. So I'm going to click on, we do have some options here. And actually we could probably just find the wood. If we click on, well, there's our plywood, softwood lumber. Okay, so we'll click on softwood lumber and I'll hit OK. And then we specify the thickness. Okay. If this is an exterior, let's say our thickness is 5.5 inches. Okay. And we want to make sure that structural material is selected. The reason why I'm saying 5.5 is because a 2x6 stud is actually 1.5 by 5.5. Okay, so that's why I want to make sure that I'm adding the correct thickness. Then we begin to insert. So let's start off from here. Let's start off on the interior side. You'll notice at the bottom here, it says interior. We have exterior side over here. So on the interior side, we'll hit insert. Okay, and it gave us another row inside the core. But with it selected, I can move this up and down. So I'll click down. And let's say we're just going to stick with drywall. So I'll click on this, the structure, and drywall is going to be nailed or screwed straight into our core. So that's going to be our finished material. So we're going to have the drywall, which is going to be our finish 2. The material, let's click on these 3 dots. And I'm just going to type in gypsum or gyp. There we go. Gypsum wallboard. And again, gypsum is the same as drywall. So we'll use that. And let's go with 5/8. Okay. 5/8 is a 1-hour drywall, 1-hour rated drywall. And we want to make sure that it wraps that. So that means that when we turn the corner, that it's going to wrap around the corners. So we want that this material is going to wrap around. So we want to make sure that that's selected. Okay. So there we have our exterior, our interior material. Then let's go ahead and move up to the exterior side. So I'm going to insert another row, and I'm going to move this up. Okay. So for this, what I want to do is maybe add a plywood. Okay. So I'll add a plywood to the lumber. So let's change the function, and this is going to be a substrate. Okay. And then on the substrate, or this material is going to be that plywood, which we already found. So I'll just type in ply. There's plywood sheathing. I'll hit OK. And the thickness of this, technically, I believe it's 15-30 seconds, but let's just call it 1/2. You know what? Let's do 15, 30 seconds. Okay, because we want to be exact here. And we'll hit OK. So from here, this is really where exterior walls really begin to differ, is on the exterior material. Up until now, this, most wood construction, this is how it gets constructed, with the stud, drywall on the inside, and then sheathing, plywood sheathing on the outside. Actually, then we do add a waterproofing material. Let's just add that really quickly. We're going to change that to membrane layer. You know what? I'm not sure if we have, I believe they call it a vapor. Yep, vapor retarder. So we'll add that. And this is why I added it at 15, 30 seconds, because this I will add at 130 seconds. And that's going to give me to 1/8 of an fraction. Now from here is really where, as I mentioned, things differ. If you're going to do, let's say, a metal siding, that's one type of construction. If you're going to add stucco, that's a different type of construction. Brick, that's a different type of construction. Wood siding. So this is where everything really begins to vary. Hopefully at this point, for those of you who do know construction, this gives you an idea of how to move forward from this point on. You can go ahead and add the construction that you want. For the class, if you don't know construction, at this point, this is where I would go ahead and just add the material that you want. So let's say you want a concrete finish, or let's say a stucco finish, right? It's not really a concrete finish, it's the stucco finish. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll hit insert, or if you want a metal siding, right? This is going to be our finish material. So we'll go to finish one and then add our material. So let's click there. And let's say it's just kind of a stucco. So let's type in stucco. And we have wall textured stucco. We have coarse, knockdown, stipple, peel. We also have plaster. Now, plaster is kind of a smoother finish. So maybe I use, if I want a smooth kind of stucco look, I would probably use plaster over the stucco, just because when it renders, it'll render smoother than the actual stucco, which is just the very generic, typical kind of, it's not the coarse stucco, but it's a little rough. So you could use plaster. If you wanted, I would even go as far as, if you want just, let's say, concrete finish instead, you could type in concrete and you could add any of these. We also have more. So like if you want a broom finish concrete or board form finished concrete wall, then we could add that. We would go ahead and add that, because again, at this point, we'll hit board formed, I'll hit apply and okay. At this point, it's really about getting the visual, getting the image correct, right? So like the material correct. So we'll click on concrete board form. You select whatever material it is that you want. And then generally, I mean, this is really rough again if we're just generalizing things, but let's stick with 3/4 of an inch. Okay. You can make this thicker, you can make it thinner, whatever you feel is appropriate. Okay. Now at this point, we're looking at our wall thickness, and it's 7 3/8. Okay. At this point, it is what it is. But sometimes, so if we said, before I jump the gun here, at this point, we would hit OK. Membrane layer function requires 0 thickness. Oh, okay. So that saying that it requires a 0 thickness, not a 1/32 of an inch. So by doing that, now my wall thickness is 7/11 and 30 seconds. And I do not like that, because when we go off to dimension, it means that I'm always going to be, a 30 seconds off. So let's go ahead and change this to 1/2. There we go. So we want all of our dimensions at the tiny, or at the most detailed level, up to 1/8 of an inch. Okay. So now I would hit OK, and oh no, and I we should have duplicated this. I forgot that very important step at the very beginning. Luckily, we started with the generic, so the generic walls are very basic and simple, but you do want to make sure to duplicate this and name it what the type of wall that it's going to be. So let's say board form exterior. Okay. Then we would hit OK, and now we have our board form wall. Okay. And so that's what our wall would look like. And if we went to an elevation view, we go to textures, right? And there's the board form. Okay. Now, if for the assignment that we have, if your wall is thicker, some walls are a lot thicker, and you want to match that thickness, then you can always go in, edit type, edit, and then just beef up the thickness of your structure. So you can make that thicker. You could even, if it seems like it's just all concrete, we could change it from lumber and just add the concrete, add a concrete. I would do a concrete masonry unit because that's structural. Right? And now you could have a thicker, um, a, a thick creature, thicker wall. And let's say you need this to be 8 inches. Right now our thickness got up to almost 10 inches. So we hit apply and OK. And so now we have that. Right? So that's another option that you could do as well. But hopefully that helps in understanding how we can edit the wall type, create our walls, and how you can move forward with the final project. Good luck, everyone.